This is a special English broadcasting regarding North Korea's provocations and need to build a more stronger US-Korea alliance system amid this kind of strategic failures made by our government, especially during the last 5 years. Leftist government total failure to deter North Korea from making all the provocations, including launching missiles, even talking about going to seventh nuclear test. And this is right time for Seoul and Washington, fully aware of Pyongyang's simple strategy aimed at securing its survival by orchestrating cycle of saber rattling and covert weapons development. Seoul and Washington should make more combined effort with more detailed strategies. Otherwise, North Korea will continue this kind of vicious cycle of provocations and dialogue, compensation, again and again, giving more time North Korea to develop nuclear weapons. This is a serious situation as of now. And as we all understand, still the problem is that South Korea and the US find it extremely difficult to get Pyongyang to give up on its playbook. And consequently, North Korea is continuing to test missiles, now even testing ICBM, possibly reaching into the main territories of North Korea. Last Thursday, we were all also surprised at North Korea's ICBM test that flew from Sunan area of its capital city Pyongyang toward East Sea. And everybody analyzed that probably this time it succeeded in reaching its goal of ICBM development, further threatening to American people that anytime in the future North Korea can launch ICBM with nuclear warhead on its missile capabilities. So this is a total surprise, total surprise, not only to Americans but also to South Koreans, who are always fully aware of this kind of dangerous frequency made by North Korea every day, and possibly facing North Korean threat along the demilitarized zone at the heart of the Korean Peninsula. We are much more worried about this kind of new development happening in North Korea. But I have been criticizing during the last 5 years why President Moon Jae-in of the leftist government has pushed for such an engagement policy with Pyongyang, while trying not to issue official condemnations against Pyongyang's this kind of brinkmanship, and even not saying provocations, but saying sorry to hear that, regret, something like that. Total failure of North Korean policies pushed by President Moon Jae-in of the leftist government. And even this time, United States, Japan, South Korea, and its possible allied forces in the United Nations Security Council failed to adopt a strong statement to condemn North Korea's missile provocations, because People's Republic, China, and Russia opposed to this kind of moves. It is quite regrettable that international system broke down, even not making official statement, condemning those violations, which was made very, very, manifest by the United Nations Security Council's regulations. And what is more worrisome is that it is now a matter of time before Pyongyang would toy with both missile launches and nuclear tests, suggesting that President Moon Jae-in's inter-Korean policy based on naive expectations of Pyongyang's may result in heightening the geopolitical tension and helping the regime buy time to develop more destructive weapons. And it is actually happening. And the failure of UN Security Council to issue a stronger press statement denouncing Pyongyang's latest ICBM stone launch is a very, very bad signal to the international community. And due to the opposition of China and Russia, in the future, I don't think, we don't have any effective means to deter North Korea from further provocations. This is a very, very important era because we are in a transitional period from a Moon Jae-in's leftist government to the rightist government of Yoon Suk-yeol. In May, a new government will be inaugurated. And it is right time to get tougher with North. We must be more tougher. And I think, North Korea's scrapping of self-imposed moratorium on long-range missile launches and nuclear tests, it is a very, very red signal. And President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol must be fully aware of this kind of very acute, sensitive, security situation happening on the Korean Peninsula. And more worrisome is that Pyongyang might continue its missile launches as well as resume its nuclear test amid the Ukraine crisis there and South Korea's power transition period, as I predicted several times in the past. And also the possible seventh nuclear test by North Korean regime will give us more tension-ridden situation on the Korean Peninsula. And even though the United States and the South Korean government are trying with more tougher sanctions against North Korea, as China and Russia are opposed to this kind of international move to sanction North Korea, our government is in such a hard time to deal with North Korea. So it is recommendable that the President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol had better meet with U.S. President Joe Biden as soon as possible through the formula of a summit meeting after just 10th May inauguration ceremony in South Korea to prove that Seoul-Washington security alliance is ever stronger than before and North Korea will never attain its military goal under this kind of provocation schemes. So it is very important that the normalization of Korea-US alliance will be a key agenda of a new government, Yoon Suk-yeol government. And our government, our transitional team is sending non-leftist government. The new government team will send a special diplomatic representative to Washington to cement this kind of Korea-US ties, because Korea-US ties has been damaged to a certain level that even military joint exercises are some part cancelled or some part are done in a computer simulation game. Very dangerous situation. So President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's strong message to quickly normalize Korea-US alliance will be a cornerstone of South Korean security strategy in the next government. Also, I feel a great sense of responsibility at this time of a critical juncture when our government is sending a very strong message to Washington that more than any time else, our government needs more cooperation from Washington. And in the future, even though China and Russia is at the opposite side of our strategy, to prevent North Korea from further provocations, Washington and so on must be fully united first, possibly making Japan more allied to our bilateral security framework in the future. As you see, the Moon Jae-in administration has been pushing to formally declare an end to the war, which ended with an armistice in the year 1953. At the time, it was not a peace treaty, and still the two Koreas are technically at the situation of war. And this leftist government spent, so much energies, diplomatic energies and time devoting to a very, very vague, concept of ending the Korean War declaration, something like that. This was a wrong direction of South Korean diplomacy, especially thinking about the alliance politics. And so I think that declaration of an end to the war without substantial denuclearization from the North only will incapacitate the Korea-US alliance and jeopardize the security situation of the Korean Peninsula. Also, the strategic ambiguity strategy pursued by the leftist government between Beijing and Washington, it also has undermined the trust of the alliance. So we have to restore this kind of mistrust as soon as possible, and the next government should protect Korea's national interest, national identity, and people's right to live and pursue dignified diplomacy, because leftist Moon Jae-in government has lost those kind of confidence, as I mentioned, in these areas. So this time I expect the diplomatic delegation visiting Washington to discuss full resumption of Korea-US joint military exercises, which have been scaled down since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And also we have to restore the Seoul, Washington, Tokyo trilateral cooperation, despite the ongoing diplomatic law between Korea and Japan over a number of issues stemming from 1915 to 1945 Japanese annexation of Korea. And that's past. And the future is another new era that our national security interest must be secured. So those kind of urgent diplomatic issues are at the hand table of President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol, and our special effort this time, visiting Washington. I want again emphasize that normalization of Korea-US alliance will be the key agenda for the time being when a new government is inaugurated in the coming May. And without this kind of a basic framework, our security interest will be eroded further. And amid escalating tensions coming from North Korea's provocations and possible seventh nuclear test, there is no way for South Korea only by ourselves there is no way to deter North Korea from further very negative actions. So our alliance system must be fully restored as soon as possible, especially Korea-US bilateral alliance, and also further Korea, US, Japan trilateral security cooperation alliance should be enhanced as soon as possible. So I remember that when I visited Washington 2019 October, I met a lot of US government officials and some politicians, and even made a speech in front of the White House there, sending South Korean government really regard the Korea-US alliance as a very, very important South Korea security asset, and the majority of South Koreans want American troops on the Korean Peninsula. So don't listen to leftist voices on the Moon Jae-in administration's era. So I strongly addressed this kind of South Korea's conservative voices in front of the White House. Also, when I made a speech at the National Press Club in Washington in front of those journalists and reporters, especially reporting the White House affairs there, I strongly emphasized the Korea-US alliance, and at that time I criticized the leftist government, Moon Jae-in's wrong diplomatic policies and their very, very bad stance, to move away from Korea-US alliance, more tilting toward, Beijing's, the strategy there. So at the time, I strongly urged, the US government officials and the journalists there, what most South Koreans want from US government is that we regard the Korea-US alliance system as one of the most important, security asset South Korea have as of now. So at the time, when Americans were also worried about the leftist orientations of this Moon Jae-in administration, I fully conveyed this kind of people's heart, South Koreans' true mind, that the true conservative voices of the Koreans are in keeping Korea-US alliance system at the time. And finally, in the last March 9th presidential election, a new conservative government was born. A leader was elected, and fortunately we are able to have more stronger Korea-US alliance system with more stable and peaceful tone in the future. And this is a great relief to the normal South Koreans, and as I have analyzed several times in English, especially sending messages to those Korean Americans living abroad, also to those foreigners who love Korean politics here, also who want Korean people enjoy more alliance politics in the future, so that the totalitarianism, undemocratic forces will be passing away from our history. The sooner the better. So this is an international era with all the universal voices sticking to liberty and the market economy. And we are also strongly promoting human rights situation everywhere in the world, especially people living in those totalitarian, socialist, communist blocks still. So this is a very important momentum in South Korean history, especially. We are at the heart of very core politics in East Asia, and this time, as a new government is born in May, normalization of Korea-US alliance will be the key agenda, and we will have more, safer and more stable security systems, so that our economic benefit will be more secured also in the future. So I expect the special diplomatic delegation dispatched by a power transition team here, especially with the message from President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol, will pave the way for stronger Korea-US alliance system there in Washington. I expect, and I strongly, urge also Americans, there to fully protect, South Korean people from possible North Korea's, nuclear games in the future. Thank you. This is Park TV, Special English Broadcasting.